Jack Monroe sat on the worn-out couch in his small, cluttered living room. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper and piles of old newspapers stacked haphazardly against the walls. Jack had spent most of his life chasing stories, big ones, little ones, and everything in between, but those days were behind him now. Or so he thought. It all started with a garage sale down the street. Jack wasn't even looking for anything special. He just needed something to do on a lazy Saturday morning. As he rummaged through boxes of dusty books and mismatched kitchenware, his eyes landed on an old laptop tucked away in the corner. Its screen was cracked, but it looked sturdy enough to still work. For $5, it seemed like a bargain. Back home, Jack plugged the laptop into his desk and powered it up. It took some fiddling, but eventually, he managed to bypass the login screen. What he found inside made his heart race. Hidden folders filled with encrypted files stared back at him. At first glance, they appeared to be random strings of numbers and letters, but one file caught his attention. A document labeled KL Notes. KL? Who was KL? Curiosity got the better of him. After hours of tinkering, Jack managed to decrypt the file. What he read sent chills down his spine. The notes referenced someone named Karoline Leavitt, describing her as a key figure in what seemed to be some sort of top-secret government project. There were mentions of intercepted signals from space, strange experiments, and warnings about classified technology. None of it made complete sense, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just junk data. This was something big. Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He hadn't felt this kind of excitement since his days as a journalist. Back then, he'd been known for uncovering scandals and exposing corruption, but that career ended abruptly when a story went wrong, costing him not only his job but also his reputation. Since then, he'd kept to himself, avoiding anything remotely controversial. Yet here he was again, staring at information that could change everything. He knew he couldn't tackle this alone. His mind immediately went to Emily Dawson, an old friend from high school. They hadn't spoken much over the years, but Jack remembered how sharp she was. Emily had gone on to become a data analyst for a private tech firm, and if anyone could help make sense of these files, it was her. The next day, Jack drove to Emily's apartment in downtown Boston. She lived in a sleek high-rise with floor-to-ceiling, windows that offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. When she opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to concern as she saw the look on Jack's face. "Jack? What's going on?" Emily asked, stepping aside to let him in. "I need your help," Jack said without preamble. He explained everything: the garage sale, the laptop, the mysterious files. Emily listened intently, her brow furrowing as he described the contents of the KL notes. "This sounds insane," she said finally, shaking her head. "But also kind of incredible. That's why I came to you," Jack replied. "If anyone can crack this, it's you." Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay, let me see what you've got." For the next several hours, they pored over the files together. Emily's expertise quickly became apparent as she navigated through layers of encryption and cross-referenced fragments of text. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge. Karoline Leavitt had been part of a team working on decoding extraterrestrial signals. The notes hinted at groundbreaking discoveries, technology far beyond human understanding, but also warned of dangerous consequences if misused. As they worked, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time he glanced out the window or heard a noise in the hallway, his nerves jangled. Maybe it was paranoia, but given the nature of what they were dealing with, he couldn't rule out the possibility that someone else knew about the files. Their breakthrough came late that night when Emily stumbled upon a reference to Robert De Niro, not the famous actor, but a reclusive scientist who had once been a vocal advocate for transparency in government research programs. According to the notes, De Niro had worked closely with Karoline Leavitt before vanishing from public view years ago. "We need to find him," Jack said firmly. "If anyone knows more about this, it's him." Finding Robert De Niro proved easier said than done. Public records showed no trace of him after 2025, and any online presence he might have had was scrubbed clean. But Jack refused to give up. Using every trick he'd learned during his journalism days, he tracked down a lead pointing to a remote cabin in Maine where De Niro was rumored to live. A week later, Jack and Emily stood outside the cabin, unsure of what to expect. The air was crisp and the surrounding woods were eerily silent. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a gaunt man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "Who are you?" De Niro demanded, his voice gravelly. "My name is Jack Monroe," Jack said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "And this is Emily Dawson. We think we found something you'll want to see." De Niro studied them for a long moment before stepping aside. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but filled with stacks of books and papers. Once seated, Jack laid out the details of their discovery, showing De Niro copies of the decrypted files. When Jack finished speaking, De Niro sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as though carrying the weight of the world. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. "This isn't just a story. It's a matter of life and death." Despite his initial reluctance, De Niro agreed to share what he knew. Over the course of the evening, he painted a chilling picture of a secret program called Project Horizon. Funded by shadowy government agencies, the project aimed to decode alien transmissions intercepted by SETI. Karoline Leavitt had been one of its brightest minds until she disappeared under mysterious circumstances. "She uncovered something they didn't want anyone to know," De Niro explained. "Something powerful and dangerous." By the time Jack and Emily left the cabin, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. But as they drove back to Boston, neither of them could shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Whatever secrets Karoline Leavitt had uncovered, they were bigger than either of them had imagined. And now they were neck-deep in a mystery that might cost them more than they bargained for. The days that followed their second encounter with the beacon felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Jack, Emily, and Daniel returned to Boston with a newfound sense of purpose. The visions they had experienced at the monolith lingered in their minds, shaping how they viewed not just the artifact but humanity itself. The beacon wasn't just a relic from another world. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's potential for both greatness and destruction. Their first task was to share what they had learned. Jack took the lead on this, crafting a series of articles that carefully balanced revelation with restraint. He didn't want to overwhelm people with fear or skepticism, so he framed the story as a call to action, a chance for humanity to rise above its divisions and embrace something greater than itself. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations across social media, news outlets, and community forums. Emily focused her energy on decoding the final pieces of the puzzle. She pored over the files recovered from the laptop, cross-referencing them with the insights she had gained during their encounters with the beacon. Slowly, she began to understand more about the alien transmissions, how they carried instructions, not only for technological advancement but also for spiritual growth. The messages hinted at a universal truth. Consciousness was the key to unlocking the mysteries of existence. Daniel kept watch over their operation, ensuring they stayed safe, while navigating the fallout from Kane's failed attempt to destroy the beacon. Though Victoria Kane and her operatives were no longer an immediate threat, they had vanished after the incident in the valley. Daniel knew better than to let his guard down. Shadows still lurked in the periphery, waiting for the right moment to strike. As word spread about the beacon, reactions varied widely. Some dismissed it as a hoax, refusing to believe that such a thing could exist. Others embraced the idea wholeheartedly, seeing it as proof of humanity's place in a larger, cosmic narrative. Grassroots movements sprang up around the globe, advocating for transparency, ethical use of advanced technology, and global cooperation. People began organizing protests outside government buildings, demanding answers about Project Horizon and other classified programs. But not everyone welcomed the revelations. Powerful factions within governments and corporations pushed back against the tide of public interest, labeling Jack's articles as misinformation and accusing him of endangering national security. Anonymous threats flooded his inbox, warning him to stop publishing or face consequences. Despite the pressure, Jack refused to back down. One evening, as the trio gathered in Emily's apartment to review their progress, Jack received a message from an unknown sender. It contained a single line: "Meet me where it all began." The sender's identity was hidden, but the meaning was clear. "It's De Niro," Jack said after reading the message aloud. "He wants to see us." Emily frowned. "Do you think it's safe?" "We don't have much choice," Jack replied. "If he has something important to say, we need to hear it." The next morning, they drove back to the remote cabin in Maine where Robert De Niro had first warned them about the dangers of pursuing the truth. When they arrived, De Niro greeted them with a mixture of relief and concern. "I heard about what happened at the Beacon," he said, ushering them inside. "You've done more than I ever thought possible, but now you're in deeper than you realize." "What do you mean?" Emily asked. De Niro sighed, sinking into a chair by the fireplace. "The Beacon isn't just a test for humanity, it's a signal. By activating it, you've alerted others to its location. Not just humans, but others." "Others?" Daniel repeated, his voice tense. "Civilizations far older and more advanced than ours," De Niro explained. "They've been watching us for centuries, waiting to see if we're ready to join the galactic community. What you've done proves that we might be, but it also means they'll come here soon." Jack leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Are you saying aliens are coming to Earth?" "Not necessarily," De Niro replied. "But they'll send representatives, ambassadors, and when they arrive, they'll expect us to demonstrate that we can handle the responsibility of joining their network." "And if we can't?" Emily asked softly. De Niro hesitated before answering. "Then we risk being left behind, or worse." The weight of his words settled heavily on them. They had always known the stakes were high, but this added a new layer of urgency. Humanity wasn't just facing itself, it was facing the universe. Back in Boston, they redoubled their efforts, working tirelessly to prepare for whatever came next. Jack continued writing, using his platform to educate and inspire. Emily collaborated with scientists and researchers to develop guidelines for studying the Beacon's effects responsibly. Daniel coordinated with activists and grassroots organizations to build a global movement centered on unity and progress. Months passed, and the world began to change. Governments reluctantly opened dialogues about transparency in research programs like Project Horizon. Corporations faced mounting pressure to prioritize ethical innovation over profit. Communities came together, finding common ground in the shared goal of preparing for humanity's next chapter. Then, one crisp autumn morning, reports began flooding in from observatories around the world. A fleet of unidentified objects had entered Earth's orbit. They weren't hostile, not yet, but their presence was undeniable. The ambassadors had arrived. Jack, Emily, and Daniel watched the live feeds alongside millions of others, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The ships descended slowly, hovering above major cities before deploying sleek humanoid figures, clad in shimmering suits. These beings communicated telepathically, their voices resonating in every language simultaneously. "We are here to assess your readiness," one of them announced. "Show us that you are worthy of joining the galactic network." For a moment, panic rippled through the crowds, but then something remarkable happened. People began gathering in squares and parks, holding up signs that read, "We are ready," and "Unity is our strength." Voices rose in song, chanting messages of hope and determination. Even those who had once doubted the Beacon's existence joined in, moved by the collective spirit of humanity. Among the throngs of people stood Jack, Emily, and Daniel. Their journey had brought them here, to the precipice of a new era. As the ambassadors observed the demonstrations, their expressions softened almost imperceptibly. "You have shown courage and resilience," one of them said finally. "We will guide you further, but remember, the path ahead is yours to walk." With that, the ships ascended, disappearing into the sky as quickly as they had arrived. The crowd erupted in cheers, tears streaming down countless faces. Humanity had taken its first step toward the stars. In the days that followed, Jack visited De Niro one last time. The aging scientist greeted him with a smile, his eyes shining with pride. "You did it," De Niro said simply. "You gave humanity a chance." Jack nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. "It wasn't just me, it was all of us." De Niro placed a hand on his shoulder. "And that's exactly why you succeeded." As Jack drove away from the cabin, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in history, humanity was walking it together. Whatever challenges lay in store, they would face them not as individuals, but as a united species reaching for the stars. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity for Jack, Emily, and Daniel. They worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of information they had gathered about the beacon and its origins. Emily spent countless hours analyzing the encrypted files, cross-referencing them with the visions she had experienced during their encounter at the monolith. Jack focused on crafting a narrative that could be shared with the public, a story that would inspire curiosity rather than fear. And Daniel, ever the protector, kept watch over their operations, ensuring they stayed one step ahead of those who might try to silence them. Their network of allies grew slowly but steadily. Scientists intrigued by the possibility of extraterrestrial contact joined forces with journalists eager to expose government secrets. Activists advocating for transparency and technology development lent their voices to the cause. Together, they formed an unlikely coalition united by a single goal: to ensure humanity approached the beacon's knowledge responsibly. But as their movement gained traction, so did the risks. Victoria Kane's organization wasn't idle. Reports surfaced of operatives infiltrating research labs, stealing data, and intimidating key figures within the coalition. Anonymous threats began appearing online, warning Jack and his team to abandon their efforts or face dire consequences. One evening, while reviewing footage from a security camera installed outside Jack's apartment, Daniel noticed something alarming. A black van had been parked across the street for 3 consecutive nights, its occupants never stepping out. It was subtle, but it was enough to raise suspicions. "They're watching us," Daniel said grimly, pointing to the screen. "We need to move." Jack nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. "Where do we go? We can't just disappear." "We don't have to," Emily interjected. "We split up. That way, if they target one of us, the others can keep working." It was a risky plan, but they didn't have many options. The next morning, they packed what little they could carry and went their separate ways. Jack headed north, seeking refuge in a small cabin near the Canadian border. Emily traveled south, holing up in a rented room above a cafe in Savannah, Georgia. Daniel stayed behind in Boston, keeping tabs on Kane's people while maintaining communication with his siblings through secure channels. For weeks, they operated independently, each focusing on different aspects of their mission. Jack wrote articles detailing Project Horizon and the existence of the beacon, publishing them under pseudonyms on independent news platforms. His words sparked debate, drawing both supporters and skeptics into the conversation. Emily continued her analysis of the files, uncovering details about the alien transmissions that hinted at a larger galactic network, a web of civilizations sharing knowledge across vast distances. Meanwhile, Daniel uncovered evidence of Kane's ties to a shadowy conglomerate known only as the Consortium. Through careful surveillance and strategic hacking, he pieced together a dossier revealing the group's involvement in numerous covert projects aimed at weaponizing advanced technologies. Armed with this information, he leaked it to trusted contacts within the coalition, hoping to turn public opinion against them. Despite their efforts, the pressure mounted. One night, Emily woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door. Her heart raced as she grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the noise. Peering through the peephole, she saw 2 men in dark suits pacing the hallway below. She quickly packed her belongings and slipped out through the fire escape, disappearing into the humid Savannah night. Hours later, she called Jack from a payphone. "They found me," she whispered. "I'm heading your way." "Stay safe," Jack replied, his voice tense. "I'll meet you halfway." While Emily made her way north, Jack prepared to leave the cabin. He knew it was only a matter of time before Kane's people tracked him down too. As he loaded his car, he received a message from Daniel. Kane knows about the beacon's location. They're planning to destroy it. Jack's blood ran cold. If the beacon was destroyed, all hope of understanding its purpose would vanish along with it. He immediately relayed the news to Emily, who agreed to rendezvous with Daniel in Boston. From there, they would head back to the mountains and protect the artifact at all costs. The journey was fraught with danger. Emily narrowly avoided capture when a suspicious driver flagged her down on the highway. Jack's car broke down in the middle of nowhere, forcing him to hitchhike for miles until he found another vehicle. Daniel, meanwhile, faced off against two of Kane's operatives in a deserted parking garage, managing to subdue them but sustaining injuries in the process. When they finally reunited in Boston, exhaustion etched deep into their faces. They wasted no time. Armed with supplies and determination, they set out once again for the Appalachian Mountains. This time, they took extra precautions, traveling at night, avoiding main roads, and keeping constant communication through encrypted devices. Upon reaching the valley, they found signs of recent activity. Tire tracks marred the dirt path leading to the ruins, and fresh footprints littered the ground. The beacon stood untouched, its surface glowing faintly as though aware of their presence. "They haven't done it yet," Emily said, her voice filled with relief. "We still have a chance." As they approached the monolith, a low hum resonated through the air, growing louder with each step. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, Victoria Kane herself, flanked by several armed guards. "Impressive," Kane said, her tone dripping with mockery. "You actually made it back. Did you think I'd let you stop me?" Daniel stepped forward, his stance defiant. "You don't understand what this is. Destroying it won't solve anything." "It's too dangerous to exist," Kane snapped. "Humanity isn't ready for something like this." "And you are?" Jack shot back. "You're not saving anyone. You're just scared of losing control." Kane's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, the beacon's glow intensified, bathing the clearing in blinding light. The hum grew deafening, forcing everyone to cover their ears. Visions flooded their minds once more, images of planets colliding, stars being born, and civilizations rising and falling. But this time, the messages were clearer. The beacon wasn't just a tool. It was a test. When the light faded, Kane and her guards lay unconscious on the ground. The trio stood shaken but unharmed, the artifact pulsing softly before them. "What just happened?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. Emily placed a hand on the beacon, tears streaming down her face. "It showed us the truth," she said. "This isn't about power, it's about trust. Trust in ourselves, in each other, and in the universe." Jack nodded, understanding dawning on him. "If we pass the test, maybe we earn the right to use it, to grow." Daniel looked at his siblings, then at the beacon. "So, what do we do now?" Emily turned to face them, her expression resolute. "We tell the world all of it. The good, the bad, and the scary parts. Because if we can't handle the truth, we don't deserve the answers." With renewed purpose, they left the valley, leaving the beacon standing tall amidst the ruins. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it, together. The standoff in the clearing felt like it lasted an eternity, though only seconds had passed. Victoria Kane's steely gaze swept over Jack, Emily, and Daniel, her armed team fanning out behind her. The air was thick with tension, every breath heavy with the weight of what was at stake. "Last chance," Kane said coolly, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Give us the files or we'll take them by force." Jack swallowed hard, his mind racing. He glanced at Emily, who stood frozen, her eyes locked on the beacon. Daniel, ever the soldier, shifted slightly, positioning himself between Kane's group and his siblings. His hand hovered dangerously close to his weapon, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. "We don't have the files," Jack lied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "They're gone. You're too late." Kane's lips curled into a thin smile, one that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "You're not as clever as you think, Monroe. We've been watching you since you left Boston. You brought everything we need right here." Emily's heart sank. She hadn't noticed anyone following them, but now that she thought about it, the strange glitches on her phone and the unsettling dreams made sense. They had been tracked from the start. Her fingers twitched nervously at her sides, her mind screaming for a way out of this mess. Daniel took a step forward, his posture defensive. "You're outnumbered here," he said, his tone firm. "If you want a fight, you'll get one." Kane chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Brave words. For someone so outmatched." She raised a hand, signaling her team to raise their rifles. "But I'm not here to negotiate. Hand over what you've found or we'll take it, and deal with you permanently." For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the rustling leaves overhead and the faint hum emanating from the beacon. Then, without warning, Emily broke, free from Daniel's protective stance, and sprinted toward the monolith. "Emily!" Jack shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Kane barked an order, and two of her operatives lunged after Emily, but she was faster. Reaching the beacon, she placed her hands on its smooth, warm surface. A surge of energy coursed through her body, and the structure responded. Its glow intensified, bathing the entire clearing in blinding white light. "What have you done?" Kane screamed, shielding her eyes. No one could answer. The world around them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a kaleidoscope of images and sensations. Jack saw flashes of alternate realities, cities floating among the stars, humans living in harmony with machines, and desolate wastelands where civilization had crumbled. Daniel experienced visions of battles fought across galaxies, while Emily felt herself connected to something ancient and vast, a presence that whispered truths beyond comprehension. When the light finally faded, the operatives were gone, leaving only Kane and her two closest guards. They looked disoriented, their weapons lowered. Jack, Emily, and Daniel staggered to their feet, struggling to process what had just happened. Kane's expression shifted from anger to something resembling fear. "You idiots! Do you even realize what you've unleashed?" Emily stepped forward, her legs trembling but her voice steady. "I think I do. This isn't a weapon, it's a message. A warning." "A warning?" Kane spat, her composure slipping. "That thing is a threat to everything we've built." "No," Emily said, firmly. "It's a gift, and you're too afraid to see it." Kane glared at her, then signaled her remaining guards to retreat. "This isn't over," she snarled before disappearing into the woods. Once they were alone, the trio collapsed onto the ground, their bodies drained and minds overwhelmed. The beacon pulsed softly, its hum now quieter, almost soothing. "What was that?" Daniel asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Jack admitted, rubbing his temples, "but I think we just dodged a bullet." Emily stared at the beacon, her thoughts racing. "It showed me things," she said quietly. "Other worlds, other versions of us. It's like it wanted to teach us something." "Teach us what?" Jack pressed. "That we have a choice," Emily replied. "We can use this knowledge to grow, or destroy ourselves trying to control it." The gravity of her words hung in the air. None of them spoke for a long time, each lost in their own reflections. Eventually, Daniel stood up, brushing dirt off his pants. "We should go," he said. "Whatever this thing is, staying here isn't safe. If Kane comes back with reinforcements, we won't stand a chance." Reluctantly, they gathered their belongings and began the trek back to the SUV. As they drove away, Emily kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the valley disappear into the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that the beacon had changed her, changed all of them in ways they didn't fully understand yet. Back in Boston, they decided to lay low for a while. The events in the mountains had left them shaken but resolute. They knew they couldn't trust anyone. Not the government, not corporations, and certainly not people like Victoria Kane. Whatever secrets the beacon held, they would have to unravel them on their own. Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into studying the notes they'd recovered, searching for clues about the artifact's origins and purpose. Jack worked tirelessly to document everything they'd discovered, determined to share the truth with the world, but cautiously, knowing the risks involved. Daniel stayed close, acting as both protector and strategist, helping them plan their next move. One evening, as they sat together in Jack's apartment, Emily voiced a concern that had been nagging at her. What if we're wrong? What if exposing this causes more harm than good? Jack sighed, leaning back in his chair. I don't know, Em, but keeping it hidden feels worse. If people knew what's out there, what's possible, they might stop fighting each other and start working together. And if they don't? Daniel asked pointedly. Not everyone will see it your way. Some will try to exploit it. No matter what? Emily nodded slowly. That's why we have to be careful. We can't just dump this on the world and hope for the best. We need to show them why it matters. As the night wore on, they debated their options, weighing the pros and cons of going public versus staying underground. By the time they finally called it a night, they still hadn't reached a decision, but they knew one thing for certain. Whatever path they chose, they would face challenges far greater than anything they'd encountered so far. In the days that followed, they began reaching out to trusted contacts, scientists, journalists, and activists who might help them spread the word without drawing unwanted attention. Each conversation was cautious, veiled in vague language and coded phrases. Slowly but surely, they started building a network of allies, people who believed in the importance of transparency and ethical progress. But even as their movement gained momentum, threats loomed on the horizon. Kane's shadowy organization wasn't the only group interested in the beacon. Rumors spread of other factions, some human, some potentially extraterrestrial, closing in on the artifact. Every step forward felt like a gamble, every decision fraught with uncertainty. Despite the danger, Jack, Emily, and Daniel pressed on, driven by a shared belief that humanity deserved a chance to rise above its flaws. They didn't know what the future held, but they were willing to fight for it, for a world where knowledge wasn't feared but embraced. Jack and Emily returned to Boston with a mix of excitement and unease swirling in their minds. Robert De Niro's warnings echoed in their thoughts, but they couldn't ignore the thrill of uncovering something so monumental. The files they had brought back from the cabin were more detailed than anything they'd seen before, and Emily quickly got to work analyzing them. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she cross-referenced notes, decrypted hidden layers, and pieced together fragments of information. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that Project Horizon wasn't just about decoding alien signals. It was about harnessing technology far beyond human comprehension. According to the documents, Karoline Leavitt had discovered a way to manipulate human consciousness using frequencies embedded in the intercepted transmissions. The implications were staggering. If used responsibly, this technology could revolutionize medicine, education, and even global peace efforts. But if misused, it could enslave entire populations or drive people mad. As Emily worked, Jack took on the task of researching Karoline Leavitt herself. He scoured old news articles, academic journals, and obscure online forums for any mention of her name. What he found painted a picture of a brilliant but troubled woman. Leavitt had been celebrated early in her career for groundbreaking research in astrophysics, but her later years were marked by controversy. Colleagues described her as obsessive, consumed by her work to the point of isolating herself from friends and family. Then one day, she simply vanished without explanation. Jack's search led him to an archived interview with Leavitt from the late 2020s. In it, she spoke cryptically about the line between discovery and destruction. When asked what she meant, she only smiled and said, "Someday you'll understand." That phrase stuck with Jack. It felt like a warning, a message meant for someone like him, someone who might stumble upon her work years later. He shared the clip with Emily, who watched it intently. She knew, Emily murmured after the video ended. She knew someone would find this eventually, but finding answers wasn't going to be easy. The more they learned, the more questions arose. Who exactly was behind Project Horizon? Why had Leavitt disappeared? And most importantly, where was the technology she had supposedly developed? Their investigation hit a snag when Emily stumbled upon a series of encrypted coordinates buried deep within the files. At first glance, they appeared random, but after running them through a mapping program, she realized they pointed to a location in the Appalachian Mountains. A quick search revealed nothing unusual about the area. A dense forest dotted with abandoned mines and hiking trails, but something about it felt significant. "We need to check it out," Jack said firmly. Emily hesitated. "Are you sure? Niro practically begged us not to get involved. What if we're walking into a trap? No, it's risky," Jack admitted. "But if there's even a chance we can stop whatever this is, don't we have to try?" Reluctantly, Emily agreed. They decided to wait until the weekend to make the trip, giving themselves time to prepare. But as the days passed, strange things began happening around them. Jack noticed his phone behaving oddly. Messages would disappear, apps would crash, and sometimes the screen would display static images of unfamiliar landscapes. Emily started having vivid dreams about standing in front of a glowing structure that emitted a low hum. She woke up each morning feeling disoriented, as though the dreams were memories rather than fantasies. Then came the surveillance. One evening, while grabbing coffee at a local cafe, Jack spotted a man sitting in a parked car across the street. The man didn't look suspicious at first glance. He wore a baseball cap and seemed focused on his phone, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Later that night, as he walked home, he noticed the same car trailing him at a distance. By the time he reached his apartment, his heart was pounding. He called Emily immediately. "Someone's following me," he said, his voice tense. "I don't think we're alone in this anymore." Emily listened carefully before responding. "We need help. Someone who can protect us if things go south." Jack thought for a moment before suggesting his estranged brother, Daniel Monroe. They hadn't spoken much in years. Not since Daniel joined the Marines, but Jack knew his brother was resourceful and capable. Reluctantly, he reached out to Daniel, explaining the situation and asking for assistance. To his surprise, Daniel agreed to meet them. The reunion was awkward at first. Daniel arrived dressed in tactical gear, his demeanor hardened by years of military training. He listened silently as Jack and Emily explained everything: the laptop, the files, Niro's warnings, and the coordinates pointing to the Appalachian Mountains. "This sounds like a suicide mission," Daniel said bluntly when they finished. "But if half of what you're saying is true, sitting around isn't an option either." With Daniel on board, they began planning their trip. Early Saturday morning, the three of them loaded supplies into Daniel's SUV and set off toward the mountains. The journey was long and quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As they drove deeper into the wilderness, cell service disappeared, leaving them completely isolated. When they finally reached the coordinates, they found themselves in a secluded valley surrounded by towering trees. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the area, just rocks, dirt, and thick underbrush. But as they explored further, they stumbled upon the ruins of an old military base. Broken concrete walls crumbled into the earth, and rusted metal signs warned of restricted access. "Looks like someone tried to cover their tracks," Daniel muttered, kicking aside a piece of debris. They continued searching until Emily froze, pointing toward a clearing ahead. Rising from the ground was a massive metallic structure, a monolith unlike anything they'd ever seen. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting light in ways that defied logic. It pulsed gently, radiating warmth despite the chilly air. "That's impossible," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jack stepped closer, his eyes wide with awe. "Is this the beacon?" Before anyone could respond, a sharp sound pierced the silence, a twig snapping nearby. They turned abruptly to see several figures emerging from the trees, clad in black tactical gear and armed with rifles. Leading them was a tall woman with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "Victoria Kane," she said, her voice icy. "You've meddled in matters far above your pay grade. Hand over the files and maybe I'll let you walk away." Daniel instinctively moved to shield Jack and Emily, his hand hovering near the holster at his side. "Who are you?" he demanded. Kane smirked. "Let's just say I represent those who prefer humanity stays in the dark, for its own good." Tension crackled in the air as both sides stared each other down. Jack glanced at the beacon, then at Emily, whose face was pale but determined. Whatever happened next, they all knew one thing for certain: This was no longer just about uncovering secrets. It was about survival, and perhaps the fate of humanity itself.